So I know I've been gone a long time, and it's what everybody says that, I've been busy and so and such, but it happens to be true. Um, so I haven't done a video in a long time, and so what I'm going to talk about is actually something that happened 2 months ago at the end of February, which is through, estate sales. I forget if it was .net or which of the estate sale listing websites it was, but I found out about the estate sale for a woman who had been a Spanish professor, like a Spanish literature professor, and she had immigrated from Argentina to the United States. And there were many books. So I went to the estate sale, and it was one of the estate sales where it had been moved off site. So it was in like a retail storefront type location that the estate sale company had. And it was a little tricky because this was at the end of February, and this estate sale was in Muskegon, in Michigan. And so all the roads and everything were clear, but the parking lot for this estate sale company was just a sheet of ice, like this thick. Your tires, are running on top of this, and then there's all this ice, and then this is, the pavement, the actual asphalt of the parking lot. In addition, it was, starting to melt. So there was liquid and wet, so it was very slippery. And, but I successfully managed to purchase the books, and leave without hurting anyone or myself. And I was glad to come because they had all of the other property from the estate sale, and I think they had combined maybe one or two estates, but they had all the property from the estates, in terms of the silverware and the china, or the ceramics, the glassware, and that kind of stuff, the lamps laid out on tables. But under the tables, they had boxes of books. And hanging from the table was a sign that said $2 per book, or $5 for the whole box. And I had to confirm with the person at the estate sale that that was correct, because it seemed to me a very good deal, because these boxes, they weren't bankers' boxes. They were actually like the kind of boxes that oranges come in. Like if you see a big, cardboard box of oranges laid out in the produce section of a supermarket. So I counted the amount of books in each box, of course, varied on how big the books were, which kind they were. One of the boxes had like 60 books, because that one had a whole bunch of paperbacks that were all just really crammed in there. A lot of boxes had less than that, but still, it was a very good deal. So I went and I bought eight of those boxes for like $40, and then I drove and I went and visited another estate sale. I had plenty of money left over. But this was a very interesting estate sale. Estate sales for professors are always great, because they always have very specific books for people who are interested in particular kinds of things. And this was also interesting because it had many academic books in Spanish, as well as some academic books in German, as well as some academic books in English. There was at least one in German, and then there were a handful that were in French, but most were in Spanish. And so it was stuff like this. So this is a book written by a historian and a musical critic that is all about rock music and its relationship with, a government and authority during the period of the military dictatorship in Argentina in the 70s and 80s. I guess that's a dictatorship that the junta that collapsed after the defeat in the Falklands War. But yeah, so of course it's all in Spanish, as you might expect. And these were the sorts of books you would have, is Spanish language books, obviously very well read. All of her books none of them were what you would call great condition. But that doesn't matter, because I can sell them for comparatively less, although this is one of the more expensive ones, and still make a profit for the price I bought them at. And two, is it's pretty hard to find books like this. I forgot about this particular one, but there were plenty of books that I was researching, and you would have to have, in addition to the price of the book, you would have to pay $30 shipping to have it sent from a bookstore. Like if you looked on Abe, the bookstore would be in perhaps in Spain, perhaps in Latin America. And like it said, it'd be just $30 to have it shipped to you without the price of the book taken into consideration at all. And she had big holdings, a lot of stuff about Argentina, because she was an Argentine, but a lot of stuff about other South American countries as well. Lots of stuff that was literary criticism or film criticism. Then there was a whole bunch of stuff that was poetry. She had collections of poetry in English and in Spanish. Some signed, a lot of stuff that it wasn't like big names. It was books of living working poets who might be alive today that were put out by small presses and small batches, and she had books of this type, often signed or inscribed by the poet to her by name. And the other thing she had that was really interesting was she had a whole bunch of books. Some of them are paperback, some of them are hardcover like this, but this is a series. This is the symbol here of the Biblia Ayacucho, or no, it's Ayacucho, which is something that is run, I think, by the Venezuelan government, or maybe it's just like a charitable or not-for-profit organization in Venezuela, where they basically put out editions of books that are important to Latin American literature or culture. And so Ayacucho is the battle that's often considered the final battle of the Latin American Wars of Independence, fought in, I believe, Peru. It was fought up in the mountains, so people had like altitude sickness during the battle. But anyway, so this is I think like an edition of the poetry of this particular author, Humberto Diaz Casanueva. So you can see the edition of the poetry. And it's not, and some of these, like I said, are paperbacks. And this one is without its dust jacket. The hardcovers just normally have dust jackets. And some of the ones I have still have the dust jackets. But particularly interesting for me is there are also lots of editions of historical works. So if you're familiar with history, you probably have heard of Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Spaniard who went to the Caribbean to make his fortune, and he witnessed the severe mistreatment of Native Americans, or rather I should say indigenous Caribbeans, under Spanish rule. And he became a Franciscan friar, and he basically spent the rest of his life advocating against the abuses of the native peoples that he had witnessed. And he wrote a whole book, I think it was called like The History of the Indies or something like that. And another book that I already sold from the Biblia Ayacucho series is Miguel Leon Portia's edition of Miguel Leon Portia was a Mexican historian who did a lot of work on the Aztecs, and particularly literary works that were in Nahuatl, which is the language of the Aztecs. I mean, the Aztecs spoke, an older historical form of the language that sometimes is called classical Nahuatl. And Nahuatl is still spoken by communities, certain indigenous communities in Mexico. But Miguel Leon Portia was one of the people who was trying to research, say, poetry in Nahuatl that was preserved in later collections, but was probably composed at or before the time of the conquest. So all this kind of literary history of the Aztecs before the conquest by the Spaniards. And so I sold that one. It was very interesting. You can find his work translated in English and available in the United States. But obviously, if you speak Spanish, presumably you want to consult his, editorial comments and writing as he wrote them in the original. Um, so I've run out of steam. I think that's about all. Just a very interesting estate, and as often when you go through books of an estate, you certainly get a certain measure of the person who collected those books over a period of time. And certainly you can say that this person had a very active and wide-ranging intellectual life.